With the impending arrival of Aster as the newest Fortitude weapon, I thought it's time we take a look at what tanks have to offer in Tower of Fantasy. Tanks are mainly used for team content and endgame challenges, bringing buffs to the team and managing aggro from bosses, allowing our DPS teammates to perform their roles without interference. Before we get into the details, let's take a look at our Fortitude roster. Each have their own advantages and disadvantages, with veteran tanks possessing almost all of these units. New players that want to play tank in Tower of Fantasy? Fear not, you'll have plenty of chances to get your desired Fortitude characters. Except... if you look at the basic description of Fortitude, we all know that tanks have the responsibility of drawing the aggro from enemies while continuously taunting them to maintain said aggro. Why do we do this? Because like many other MMORPGs, once the DPS damage overtakes your aggro, the enemy will turn their attention to the DPS and unleash unwanted attacks or skills onto the poor DPS who sometimes can't withstand these heavy attacks or brutal debuffs. Think of it this way, if our aggro could be measured in a visual meter, it would look like this. DPS gets 1 aggro for every point of damage. Tanks gain 8 aggro for every point of damage, as we get 800 aggro by being Fortitude Resonance. So our dear tanks who need to do 8 times the damage our DPS is doing, right? Not happening. So how do we maintain said aggro? Most Fortitude weapons have a feature or mechanism that allows you to taunt enemies. Example, Sakifuwa's Surge, Huang's Whole Attack, and Lan's skill all give aggro management to a certain degree. The problem is, sometimes the DPS burst damage goes way too much, way too fast. Whales, for example, can ramp up the damage so fast, even 3 seconds taunt cooldown isn't enough to save them from the eyes of the enemy, and what do? They run around in circles leading to bosses wiping the team instead. Regardless, it is the tank's duty to maintain aggro, so time those moves properly. Another critical role the tank has to pay attention to is Shatter. Most bosses in Tower of Fantasy have thicker shields that DPS or Benediction players will not be able to shatter in time, and often leads to life-threatening ultimates from the bosses. Tanks gain 60% shatter from their resonance, and even that may not be enough. Some weapons and matrices give additional shatter effects, which I'll cover later, but just remember, as long as we are talking about shielded enemies, it's on you to break them. The not so talked about responsibility that Fortitude players have to master is positioning. Good tanks can draw bosses' attention away from the team and lock them into an immobile position, allowing the team to focus fire onto the target, making the run smoother and faster. In speedruns or time attack challenges, the tactical positioning of some tanks are game-changing. They are familiar with the enemy patterns, and each step is calculated and configured in a way that DPS are able to hit their peak in the shortest time. We're talking about milliseconds, yo! Last but definitely not the least, tanks are integral in endgame content where weak point is much needed but not present. Content such as Origin of War and raids sometimes do not have the presence of weaknesses in bosses. When you are in Fortitude Resonance, hitting bosses makes them weak to the element you attack them with. Example, Muriel Ironheart is a Frost Volt Fortitude weapon. Tanking and attacking enemies with her sword will render them weak to Frost and Volt DPS. Why is this important? Endgame DPS players usually prioritize weak point Titan stats because they have the highest possible damage bonus out of the other stats. And while instances do not set the weak point by default, tanks can apply the effect onto the bosses, allowing DPS to maximize their damage accordingly. I guess it's worth mentioning, tanks used to be the main go-to person when Fantasia is needed. They still are, however, Fantasia itself may not be that needed anymore in the latest team comps, where rotations are so important to the team performance. Also, in some limited raids, the Fantasia in fact delays the boss mechanics, so the team may not want you to keep doing those Fantasias. You'll need to adapt and improvise. Traditionally, you need 2 Fortitude weapons to make up a tank team, with the third weapon being flexible. Not all team content requires tanks as much as they want to. They simply aren't as effective as big damage DPS players or as valuable as the Benediction buffers with their links and huge buffs. Endgame challengers, however, do have a need for good tanks with their latest weapons. The Origin of War have some brutal mechanics that require tanks, and as mentioned earlier, tanks are necessary to apply weaknesses. So here's an example of the team comps used. Merrill Ironheart plus Asuka will make up the base of the Fortitude comp, while the third weapon is often a buffing weapon for the DPS element you run with. If the team decides to go Frost DPS, tanks will run the team of Asuka, Merrill Ironheart and Ine for the additional Frost damage buffs when you discharge Ine. Similarly, for physical DPS teams, the tank has the option to use Claudia's Gurren Blade for the additional fist damage buffs when discharging and using Claudia's skill. Now you get the picture? Other buffing weapons could be Lan, Crow, Zero, Kokurita, etc. depending on what your team needs. Communicate with them, ask them what DPS they want to run so you can adjust your presets accordingly. Shatter tanks will use a combination of Fortitude weapons like Lan, Maril, and utilize the physical weapon Jinono as an option to further enhance the shield breaking effects. If you're running newer tank weapons such as Asuka or Maril, their elemental fusion allows you to apply both weaknesses, Fizz, Flame or Frost, Volt, from one single weapon itself. Pretty handy instead of needing 4 different elements in your presets. All tanks are usable at base 0 stars. Usable meaning bare minimum. Advancements become important if you are trying to push rankings or want to maximize your buffing capabilities, as most of the premium buffs are locked behind 6 stars. Again, the stars do not define your ability to play the role well, but at some point you may realize no matter how well you do and how perfect your gameplay is, you lack the cutting edge buffs for breakthrough. It is by design and you don't need to feel bad about it. What you can do is to budget up and save resources for weapons. Fortitude weapons don't appear so frequently as the DPS units, so it is possible to save enough resources to max your weapons whenever the tank banners arrive. I recommend tank mains to max out the weapon stars because it's really helpful to be running your tank with all benefits unlocked. I'm sure your team will feel the same too. So, how do you progress as a tank? As you do more pulls and acquire more characters, it's likely you would have summoned at least 1 or 2 Fortitude characters from the pool. Huma, Meryl, Saki, Huang, Lan and Ine are all available SSRs in the standard banner, so even if you get them at A0, you still can make up a Fortitude team. With the black gold on hand, you can choose to purchase more copies when you understand how the weapon works and whether it's worth investing in or not. With the recent newcomer event, we're given a lot of upgrade materials for our gears. Use your vitality, do your bounties and focus on increasing your stats as you get stronger. It's really helpful if you join an active crew because there's no better place to practice your tanking than with a group of friends or crewmates that you meet day in day out. Jumping into public raids or hard content may be a bit too hard if they don't know who you are or you don't know what to do properly. Relax, slow down and take it easy. Onto the matrices. Tanks have a variety of matrices they can deploy depending on the content you participate in. The best type of matrices would be the ones that buff your teammates, example Zero matrices for the damage buffs, Maril Ironheart matrices for the crit resistance shred, or 2-piece Saki Fuwa matrices if you're buffing Frost teammates. Some of these matrices are required to be on field for the effects to take place. Zero ones notably, so you gotta slot them into the weapons you use most of the time. There are scenarios where you'd require multiple set of Zero matrices just to upkeep the buffs for your team, so do your best and farm those matrices. For shield breaking comps, it's helpful if you can collect Shiro and Skyla matrices to 3 stars, as they do prove useful in shattering those boss shields. You only need 2 pieces from each and not the entire 4-piece set. Asuka matrices that help with gaining aggro are no longer available due to it being a collaboration banner. It's only available for those who have obtained it during the EVA banner runs. There are also some niche scenarios where tanks use Huma matrices to reduce damage from bosses. If you're doing the final trial challenge mode, Huma tanks are common as the damage from bosses are super high and can one-shot teammates easily. Again, rare usage but still an option to use when needed. Depending on what content you're doing and what type of tank is needed, there are several traits you can choose from. Endgame tanks normally use Echo trait to provide damage buffs to teammates nearby. For tanks that need more durability, Saki Fuwa's trait is an option to increase your resistances when in danger. Lance trait is similar to Echo and helpful for the damage buffs provided you use her weapon in your team. On rare occasions when you use Coco Ritter as a support weapon on your team, you may use Coco's trait for additional buffs when you do your thing. When in doubt, always ask your team what trait is preferred. Once you get the hang of it, you'll figure out what to use, when to use. Pure Fortitude mains have the options of going defensive Titan stats such as block and damage reduction, but fair warning, Titan gears require precious resources and time to complete to attain the stats you desire. In most cases, DPS Titan stats are preferred because at some point, even if you main a tank, you still need to do some single content for progression. The Bygone Phantasm, Sequential Phantasm and even the latest Multiverse Hunt all benefit from weak point and DPS Titan stats, so you gotta choose wisely. Gear wise, you'd want to aim highest rolls in single resistance, so that the Titan stats would give you additional resistance values for the other elements. One tip I can give you guys is, you don't really need Titan red gears to tank even the toughest contents. My tank set is made up of yellow gear with one-tap augments that have a decent amount of resistance, about 80k and above, and with team heals it's not a problem tanking high damage bosses. Even then, you'd still need time to collect gears and harness those stats. You can't expect to be ready for endgame modes in a week or two. Nope. Be patient and gear your way up. For pure buffing tank builds, you'd be using the Space-Time Rift and Thalassic Heart Relics, because most of the time you'll be positioning yourself within the boss area, so tanks are the best choice to place the Heart Relic, and it is a zonal buff-debuff relic. Once you place it, you have to keep the boss inside of that heart effect area. If you're tanking painful content and not so much focused on buffing, you can consider using the buff dealer relic in its defense mode, or the drone, or even alternate destiny if your resistance and damage mitigation is not good enough. For free to plays that do not have battle pass relics, you can opt to use the Omnium Shield relic, but do be careful of how you place the shield and not just random throwing it in between the boss and your DPS teammates. If the shield blocks the boss from seeing you, the aggro will be transferred to the DPS or Benediction teammate instead. It's not the most ideal, but we work with what we have, am I right? On to the team content. For overworld bosses, not needed. Joint operations, not needed. Void Abyss, playable, has tech buffs for Fortitude. Frontier Clash Evolution, needed for some bosses, helpful for the team. Raids, useful in some of the weekly raids, mandatory for limited time raids. Origin of War, needed for stages that have interference mechanics, also typically needed for stage 20 and above at 2000% difficulty. Final Trial, helpful for normal mode but not mandatory, needed for challenge mode. While tanks may not be the most sought after class in Tower of Fantasy, they do bring utility buffs to the battle when used correctly. Even though they aren't really required in every game mode, true tank mains will still find joy in helping out the team when necessary. Almost all veteran players would have some sort of Fortitude comp, but not all of them want to do that role in team play. It takes a real tank to truly enjoy the role and grind away when instance mode like this exists. Insane indeed. So for those Fortitude mains out there, you guys rock. And those interested in rocking as well, I'd recommend setting some basic expectations for yourself, learn the role and start building that tank of yours. You've got this.